Hi, I'm Pat Zalewski, and what I'd like to discuss is the very long fivefold developmental divination aspect of the Golden Dawn Tarot. Now, on the YouTube today, you've got a number of people who have done this divination, and some of it's good, some of it's not so hot, but essentially you get a pretty good idea of how the thing works. But without me elaborating and going over things by doing examples, but what I'd like to discuss with you in this particular video is the how and the why of it, without going into too much detail, looking at basically a snapshot of the fivefold division of the Golden Dawn Tarot, its strengths, its weaknesses, what improvements, and how it actually pans out in the good scheme of things. Well, the first thing that we're looking at is the cards. The deck is taken up and is put into four particular packs, and in these packs it's related to Yod Hey Vav Hey. Now it's not related to the elements, and it's not related to other aspects, but it's related to Yod Hey Vav Hey. Now within the confines of those particular Hebrew letters, from a Golden Dawn perspective, you got the minimum aspect as the elements, and the maximum aspect as the four worlds of the Tree of Life of the Kabbalah, which I think is quite good. So you can bounce back and forth between those. Now, the idea, if you want to get more information on either of these, you have to do some research if you're not familiar with the Kabbalah at all. Even if you are familiar with the elements, I would suggest there's a book called Astrology, Psychology, and the Four Elements by Stephen Arroyo, and some of that is available online, who's brings a wonderful interpretation of the four elements. It's roughly about page 89, 90, I think, from memory, that you can go on and have a look at how he represents them. And that will give you a further viewpoint into the elemental position of the elements. Within this reading, when you put your four packs down, you're looking for the significator. You look at the particular pack it's on, which represents a letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and you pick it up and you might say the Yod, which is the initial impetus, and you go, and also represents fire if you want to go to the more mundane side of it, and you go through it and you think, okay, the first thing that you learn is what is it overabundance in, and what is there a lack of. Those are the two elements that you should, the two principles that you should be looking at within this particular confines where you find it, and you work that out straight away. Now, there's a precedent here. You could look at an astrological chart, and on the astrological chart, you've got the elemental balance laid out, and so you can see in a chart which has an overabundance of water, an overabundance of earth, and or a lack of in particular areas. You'll find yourself in a situation here that you could pick it up and you have a snapshot of how the whole thing goes almost immediately without looking at any other aspect of the chart, strictly from the elements. That'll give you a bird's eye view, and that's essentially what this particular thing does. It's an introduction of it. And one of the interesting things about this, if you look at the Golden Dawn perspective, you'll find out that they tell you that if you can interpret the whole reading from this particular level, you don't have to go any further. One of the mistakes they made was that they tried to make it a narrative. In other words, just expand the meaning by saying a further development without elaborating exactly on what the further development means or the points of interest. And by having a narrative, they went through the entire five divisions without understanding the principles of different levels, which I thought was rather a shame, by just simply calling it a further development of the question. And clear-cut boundaries have to be applied here. This particular example of the Golden Dawn tarot reading, using the fivefold division, you'll find in Regardie's books, you'll find it in my book on the Magical Tarot of the Golden Dawn as well, and probably on the web. Really is does the Golden Dawn a disservice, because the Golden Dawn pack was never created by the time this reading was put into place, and so they clearly used probably another deck by that stage, but yet they tried to bring back the description of some of it to make it link in with the four elements. But when you give it a very, very good reading, I've been doing tarot readings for 30 years on a professional level, and I'll tell you straight that this is some of those readings interpretations are not good, especially when you're looking at it as a narrative rather than as a separate entity in itself. Each level should be separate, concentrating on a different aspect. I like to look at these different aspects now and cover something up so you have a rough idea. After you look at the initial impetus of what the whole thing represents or the introduction to it, you then pick on the 12 house divisions. Well, the house divisions tell you where to look. So you're going in. So if you have a narrative, you've got to look at where. And the Golden Dawn tarot readings, in that tarot reading example that I quoted earlier, really doesn't tell you this. It just sort of continues a further development of the question without getting into the where of it in any great detail. Now, the where of it will look at how things will happen on different levels. It's most important that you understand the different divisions of where these things will happen in different phases, and you've got to apply that to when, to a certain extent as well, which will be answered when you ask the question. You've got to ask, what's your time frame? So it's a certain extent you get a double dose of where and when. Now, when you get to the next reading, which is another 12-fold reading, that's the signs of the zodiac. When you see the question is developed further, which tells you how, and you get the basic idea of how these things develop. So you get an overall flow pattern of what's going on, the nuts and bolts of how, and the next phase that you come across is the 36 deacons. Well, that's a further delineation of how. So how is two levels. One is the overall 12. The next was the further delineation of the 36. Now that will give you a broader textual agreement. So this is one area when a narrative can go from the 12 signs to the 36 deacons to a certain extent. And when you come to the Tree of Life reading, which is the final or the conclusion of it, it's pretty much a summary of the spirit, emotional, mental, and material aspect all put together, plus a way to separate the different polarities within the reading itself, using the pillars of the Tree of Life. So you'll probably find that the introduction will also, to a certain extent, will be further elaborated on by the conclusion, and the conclusion will definitely be the Tree of Life spread. Now, each one of these spreads has different spreads within themselves, but they're important that you understand them and know how to do them, because you're concentrating on different areas of the tarot, which you do not normally get in small spreads like the Celtic Cross. You might get what covers him, what crosses him. That doesn't tell you too much. You need to get in there and get your feet wet and work at it. Now, if you understand the elements or the four worlds of the Kabbalah, and you understand the house principle of where, and you look at the house principle of, then you look at when as a combined facet with that, and you can show part of this as how. With the two divisions of the 12 signs and 36 deacons, and then the Tree of Life spread as a final conclusion. Now, if you're doing a narrative on all of this, you'd be looking at it from levels, and it certainly wouldn't go from one to the other. There'd be certain different aspects. You're hitting it from different angles, and the idea is to get your baseline so you cover all these particular angles and are good at it. You know how, where, when, and why to a certain extent. You could put all of these things together as a unit, but to do so, you do the fivefold division first as separate divisions. Now, the reason you do it as separate divisions is you're able to extract, each time you do it, a different aspect of a single reading. This is not just doing a reading. Oh, I'll do a reading and I'll look at the houses where I do when, and I'll look at something which tells me how, and I'll do another one which shows me the beginning of the movement. I'll do an end result. All of this you'll apply. Tarot readings within the Golden Dawn context, after they did all these 5 initial readings, they went to a form of reductionism, and what they did was they did smaller readings, Celtic Cross or something like that. I use a star spread myself, a hexagram spread. I find that very, very good for short answered questions. But in order to get the hang of this short answered questions, to get it done properly, you have to look at different aspects of the tarot. So it increases your knowledge, and to do so. So it's a method of saying I can do the introduction, the when, the how, and the delineation, and I can look at the end result, and I can put the whole thing together. It's a bit like doing a university paper. Being an historian, I hit from these particular. That's the way I'm coming from when I see some of this. But I did tarot readings long before I went to university. But what I would like to say is that it's important that this be done, and I insist that in people that I've taught in the meantime, all of them do this. And this tells you they're able to look at cards and right away something will click. So it's not merely a long-winded reading of a further narrative, because it's not. It's not really a narrative as such. And that's one of the basic problems with the Golden Dawn example, by trying to make it that, and it's really not. It's a different, it's level. Go from one level to the second to the further. All you're looking at different elaborations so you can get an end result of a major level, so that it will increase your perception of things. When you're familiar enough, by able to do this reading a couple of times, hitting it from different areas, uh, the reading itself, if you really want to do it, it'll probably take you a couple of hours. There's no shortcut about it, and you have to write it up, analyze it, bring it back, and to you could record it if you really want to, as just to go from memory. But it's far better if you want to look at the reading, is just take a quick picture of each particular reading on on your phone camera, and print it out in front of you when you do the summary. So you've got that right in front of you all the time. You don't have to write it up. It'll take you a couple of hours, and it'll be long-winded, but you'll get a very, very detailed reading. If you're doing it for somebody, you're doing it for yourself, and it'll be long-winded, and you really won't want to do it again for a while after you do the first one. But it's part of your training mechanism. If you want to train as part of a tarot reader from a Golden Dawn tradition, you have to do it, because not only are you looking at it from a divinatory viewpoint, you're also going to be using the knowledge that you gain from this, and you're going to be putting into the convoluted forces paper and looking at for analogies. So there's a method in this particular madness, and as I mentioned earlier, the example really doesn't. The Golden Dawn original example of this really doesn't flow by trying to make it a straight narrative, and it really doesn't hit the spot basically, and it's very, very confusing, and they did a poor job of it. But it's so far it's been the only one presented from the Golden Dawn that I've seen. I saw a couple of examples by I think Yates and Annie Horniman, but where they tried to do different aspects of the reading and do it separately, or go in that one particular method. But that's for something very important where you have the time to actually do it. These days there are lots of shortcuts that you can use. I don't profess using a shortcut all the time, but you have to understand why you're doing it. They don't give you this. And when I first started learning this under the people from ex-members of Furry Royal Temple, I was shown different methods, but what I also knew was that the Furry Royal Temple was cross-pollinated with a lot of stuff coming in from BOTA, and I had to accept that. But what I paid particular attention to was the people that learned directly under Mrs. Falcon, who didn't come in through BOTA. She did her own stuff, and there was a couple of people there that taught me this particular method and the points to look out for under Mrs. Falcon, who learned from Mrs. Falcon, and this is something of what I'm presenting you at the actual moment. And Mrs. Falcon was very good at astrology, for example, so she was able to quickly disseminate the where and how, and aspects and things like that. And so this is the overall viewpoint of how and why you do this particular reading, and you do it in the initial stages of the Golden Dawn, but later you don't really need to do it. You can do a shortcut version of your own, but if you are called upon to do a very, very thorough reading, which will take an hour and a half for somebody, or this is the method to go. If you got the time to do it, this will give you more detailed reading. You can hit it from many, many different angles and explain it in some depth. But a proper tarot reading using this type of concentration and this type of energy will take you a couple of hours to do. It will take you a couple of hours to interpret. So you're looking here at something that takes quite a while. And remember, you've got to write this up, because you're doing it with someone who wants information. So it's not just good, no good actually talking about the reading. You've got to write the thing up and give it to them on paper, because they want to go over it again and again, and this is the way to do it. So I've just outlined a few things here, and I hope it's helpful to you and to explaining why the tarot reading of the Golden Dawn has the 5 different divisions and what its strengths and weaknesses are. And thanks very much for coming in. I'll catch you at another time.